Welcome, everyone, to our June 2021 webinar on dealing with acute problems. I chose this topic because I find that people often don't get in touch with me in a timely manner when they've had an injury or an illness, or they've had some, you know, emotional things, some crisis in their life, or some spiritual crisis or something like that. So I'm thinking the mental, the emotional, the physical things that happen to us, and the spiritual things that happen to us. And a lot of times, um, when these kind of things happen, if we get sick and if we injure ourselves, particularly if it's a significant injury, one that requires perhaps some immediate medical attention, I can be very helpful in speeding the recovery and making sure we have a thorough recovery. Broken bones, lacerations, bruises, things like that. And then the usual run-of-the-mill illnesses, colds and flus, things that are contagious like that we get. Um, because other illnesses usually are not acute, although we may discover them in an acute state, but they're usually part of a chronic process. And of course, we can help with those too. And I think probably everyone on the call, if you've read my book, is aware that one of my first cases was a case of autoimmune hepatitis, and that person received all the usual medical care, and they were put on a liver transplant list. That's the kind of disease that usually isn't diagnosed until your liver is about 90% destroyed. Um, and it's like all of a sudden you feel sick and they go and do the testing and it's like, you hardly have any liver left. And I was the only alternative care that that person had sought. And in those days, I was not as familiar, shall we say, with all the different things that what could be done. I hadn't had a lot of training at that point. So I did a lot of sessions and turned that one around. And fortunately, ran into that person um, a few months ago, and they were doing very well. They'd gotten their life back and were moving on. And it's been several years now. Of course, it's been quite a number of years. And so I was very pleased that that they had done so well in follow up. But it's the kind of thing where the doctors go like, "Well, we've never seen anybody actually recover from autoimmune hepatitis, but I guess it happens." And so and she didn't tell them she was using me. And so the energy healing work that I did though was very successful. So that was more of a chronic situation though. And tonight I want to focus on those acute situations. They do come along, and I really enjoy working on acute problems. Um, part of it is they're so satisfying because they get better. And so I get the immediate gratification as well as the client gets the immediate gratification, and that makes all of us very happy. Um, a lot of times with the more, particularly the psychological stuff, um, that can be very dramatic, but usually it's quite subtle, and the people, don't feel quite as enthusiastic about the experience, of getting the healing. But it depends on the nature of what's going on, and if there's an acute situation, then it can be really, really fun, really dramatic, and really a great deal of fun. Um, Let me kind of go through those as the physical ones. I want to talk about the physical ones first, and then I'll get on to the other things. Um, Accidents and illnesses come to people every once in a while. If you're into astrology, you can say, well, yeah, there's certain periods in your life when, you may be more accident prone or certain kinds of accidents are likely to happen, or illnesses may crop up and they may crop up suddenly. And even though those may be very much karmic events, that does not mean they cannot be treated, because a lot of times what you might say the karmic debt associated with that, what you're supposed to go through, um, can be worked through quickly to bring about a resolution to that. So it's dealing with the karma and dealing with the actual whatever it is you're experiencing. So if it's like having a sore throat or something like that that's lasting, a few days or more, and you kind of go like, this doesn't feel right. I should get some help with this. And then, you come and see me. And oftentimes it just takes one session to deal with something like that. Because I always go in and I'll work on the physical level and, promote the healing, but also deal with the energy, the karma. When we say karma and we say energy, we're kind of talking the same thing here. The energy is the manifestation of the karma at the subtle level, and that's what we work with. And deal with that at its most subtle level of expression, at the level some people call it the chit, meaning that finest level of consciousness where the impressions are stored, often from one lifetime to another. And so sometimes what we're dealing with is a karma that really is not from this lifetime, it's from a previous lifetime. And sometimes it's a familial karma, something that has run in the family, maybe there's some record of it having occurred in other family members in the past. And then we come down to this time and it's like, oh, there's this karma. And many times that's fairly easy to identify and then to rectify. And I've told lots of stories about those kinds of karma. Um, Many times, I made a point in a previous webinar, and I'll make it again here tonight, that many times that kind of karma is where a person has to acknowledge to themselves that they made a mistake and be truly humble about that. And it's not about asking for forgiveness, but about offering to the field and offering to the soul of those who had previously been injured or harmed or uh, hurt in some way, that one feels remorse, and that remorse is genuine, really heartfelt and complete. And I remember one person saying to me just recently, he said, I just can't even imagine that I could do such a thing, hurt somebody. I can't even imagine hurt. It was not specific. It just, I can't even imagine that I would hurt somebody, And the thing was that in this lifetime, the penalty that they were paying, the way that was showing up, was that they had to be so careful not to hurt anybody or anything, even any other living creature. It was like they knew they had harmed people in the past, although they weren't actually consciously aware of that. I had to point that out. Um, but being aware of it or having it brought to awareness, there was a hurdle to overcome, which was the admission that they were actually capable of doing that. I did not get a complete resolution of that one, but we may yet in the future here be able to work that out. We are working on it. But it's a kind of thing that can happen where you really have to, from your side, feel the remorse and understand that you have the nature of what you've done wrong, and then make amends for that by offering, you know, uh, sympathy and empathy to those who were harmed. Um, and you think of Truth and Reconciliation Commission kind of thing. And so I help them negotiate, so to speak, not negotiate, but communicate with those who have been hurt, their sense of remorse and understanding of what they did. And then sometimes I have to go and work with those souls that were hurt because they're carrying resentment, and the energy of that resentment keeps the karma going. It keeps it from ending. So I'm going over this. I've done it before, but I think it's worth remembering that karmas are really very complicated in that way. There's often many parties involved, many different people involved, and the amends have to be made with those who are holding any energy even today, even in other lifetime from other lifetimes, so that it all can be cleared up. But it doesn't always take very long. Oftentimes, I could do that all in even one session, or sometimes just a couple of sessions, to identify the nature of that. It's not always specific. I'm spared the gory details. Sometimes I get a sense that they were pretty gory, particularly when it's medieval stuff and older, things. Um, Violence was often very much a part of the way in which dominance, authoritarian position was maintained. And so treatment of others was often very, very harsh. And so, the potential for resentment to be there is considerable. And that resentment then continues the karma. So I have to deal with both the person and then those who are harmed as a routine. And then deal with the physical symptoms that whatever they might be. And they might be very literal, but oftentimes the nature of the symptom is not it is not immediately obvious what the source of the karma for that was, and that doesn't necessarily matter. We just deal with what we have, but sometimes the dots get connected in rather graphic ways for me. I get to see the connection, and I've told many of you I have a book. It's an 8.5 by 11. In the old days, it was mimeographed. These are Xerox, but they they're just reproduced pages in a one of those plastic binders, that has the little teeth like plastic pieces that come around. And so it's this big book. It's about that thick. And it's all it is a list of symptoms or physical findings and the underlying uh, either emotion or kind of the influence that was there that could produce that kind of thing. And parts of it are extremely detailed, like which finger, which vertebra in the spinal column, that kind of thing. They're very, very specific. Other things that I've looked for in there are not very specific. But a lot of times when I'm doing the work, I can find those connections and bring some relief. So in dealing with physical stuff, it's like, well, when do you make the decision to give me a call? And I suggest sometimes that people call me because that way we can get right to work on it. And there's something about the way I work that if somebody calls me, it like tunes me into what's going on. And I can work sometimes I work right on the spot very quickly. And I really like that. It's like I haven't had a time to think about it. So it's entirely intuitive work. It's open. It's really, when I say intuitive, it's just being open to the intelligence of nature that's sending the information to me like that. And so when to give me the call? Um, well, certainly if it's serious, and the kind that's serious enough to require medical attention, um, a broken bone, yeah, doctor's probably going to have to set that, straighten it out, and in many cases, and maybe put a cast on to provide support. But then they'll tell you come back in like 5 weeks, and if I go to work on it, if you call me that day after you get home with the cast on, and say, I just broke such and such leg or an arm or finger or something. And, I really appreciate it. You speed the healing. I would say probably a week is all we need to heal that up to the point where you actually don't need the cast anymore. Whether you can persuade the doctor to take the cast off or not is another thing. I'm not in control of that part, but the healing can be that quick, instead of 5 weeks, maybe 5, 6, 7 days. So, that kind of thing is very remarkable. And of course, if you're in an accident or something, you have multiple injuries, and you kind of laid up, that's a good time to call. But it doesn't always have to be really serious stuff. It could be relatively minor stuff like, you come down with a cold, but it's a bad cold. And you go like, well, I'll be better in a week anyway. So is it worth calling? Well, it's up to you. But if you're suffering, and particularly if you have something like COVID or the influenza, where you get a lot of body aches, and fever, and you're feeling really crummy. Um, you can take your herbal remedies and do the other things that you do. Eat the chicken soup, which in my background was always called Jewish penicillin. Um, you can do the things that help you get better, and then you will get better, most likely. But it could be merciful too to get some help and speed it all along so that you get well very quickly. And I know when I got the COVID in January, I had symptoms for a couple of days before that weren't very striking, and I was working on myself. But then when got more sick and I had the fever and the body aches that were typical influenza kind of things, and I actually wasn't really aware at the time that that was COVID. Um, it wasn't until later that I got tested. And by the time I found out, I was well. Um, but I was working on myself through that, and I think that had something to do with just getting through it very quickly and very thoroughly and not developing complications. Um, and of course, we'll never know because there's no way to run a clinical trial. And and I certainly am not going to hold back on treating myself or treating anybody else. And that's really what I'm trying to get at here is if you're feeling that you're suffering from what's going on, why not get some help? It's a good thing. There's really no value in suffering. Um, I think sometimes people think they're paying their karmic debt, which is sometimes true. Uh, but we can pay the karmic debt in other ways, and just get uh, healed up much more much more quickly. So that's a really good thing. So whenever you're suffering, whenever it's not just trivial, I mean, yes, it'll probably go away, particularly if you had some laceration and the doctor sewed it up. Yeah, as they come back in a week, we'll take the stitches out, everything will be fine, or the staples. Um, but we can make sure that it heals up, heals nicely without a scar, that kind of thing. We can put attention on those things and make the process very much better. Um, Sometimes it's an emotional upset. The sudden passing of a friend would be a kind of thing, an accident that involves other people, or maybe involves you, but you're not actually physically hurt. You're only emotionally shaken up. And that's often the case. Even if you're physically okay, you still have an impression in the nervous system from the experience. When my car got rear-ended last, I guess it was fall. Yeah, I think it was early last fall. Um, I wasn't physically hurt. The car was. I wasn't physically hurt. Um, but the thing I found afterwards that lingered with me, that had made an impression on me, was the sound of my car being crumpled. That really got to me. I don't know why, it just did. And so I had to really go to work on that, and actually got a little bit of help with that um, on the physical level, massage, just to get that out of my body because it really made an impression on me. So those kinds of traumas are very real things, and sometimes some body work is very valuable also. But the energy work does work on the body, um, and will allow for that transformation to take place. And the allowing is having the awareness there and seeing what's going on in the body and how the energy pattern is disturbed. Um, and there's all kinds of things that happen with the energy pattern. Typically, a portion of the channels through which the energy flows are twisted, kind of contorted, and in my experience, and so I have to straighten those out and get the flow going again, and often expand the channels because they're tightened up. So have to do that kind of thing. Um, I haven't had the experience from an acute situation, but I have had many experiences of people who were not in their body anymore. They were like somewhere else. They were displaced. And I'd go in and try to work, and I'd go like, my attention's going outside their body. And so the energy, either they had fled out or the energy had been displaced, one way or the other, but it's often they have fled their body. And of course, the same thing happens in trauma that shows up as PTSD. People with PTSD usually are not centered in their bodies. They're usually outside their bodies. And so part of what I have to do, well, part of the diagnostic process, just so I can explain how I experience that, part of that diagnostic process is that I see that they're outside their body. I see some energy outside their body, and I try to move it in. and it won't go. That's typically what happens. Because if it goes, then the problem is solved very quickly. But the reason it's outside the body is it doesn't want to be inside the body, and it finds the body an unsafe place. And so I work with that and try to find out what it is that put it out and why it stays out. And that can be simple or it can be complicated. It can go either way. And sometimes I find just, in one session I can fix it. Sometimes it takes multiple sessions. So um, finding the energy, seeing where it's located and how it's connected or not, how tight, how much it's cut off from the body. Um, Mental illness, of course, but mental illnesses are chronic things. Um, and so, I mean, you can be depressed or upset about something that has happened, but that's not a mental illness. That's a natural reaction. But there are some people with mental illnesses, far fewer than are usually said, because a lot of times people are actually just reacting to situations. And those can be passed either through a family line of karma, or it can be passed through many lifetimes of karma. And so we treat all of them kind of the same way. We have to see what the pattern is, and then see what needs to be done to ameliorate that. And so if it's karma, what the nature of the karma, it's not the specific acts, they don't matter. But the nature of the acts, the nature of the things that transpired is what I really work with. And so I get a good sense of that, and then deal with that, as I was explaining earlier. So emotional traumas, though, they're very common. It can be all kinds of things. Losing a job, failing an exam, um, being dumped by a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever these days. Whatever it comes up like that can be very traumatic, particularly when we're not expecting it, when it comes out of the blue. And so other things that come up in relationships all of a sudden, can be very traumatic and can be dealt with as acute problems. Now, when I say acute problems, again, I'm also talking about, well, why did that come about? What was that karma that produced that? And what's the lesson to be learned in here? And if we can learn the lesson and make amends for whatever we did in the past, then we can move on and find fulfillment in our life. So, spiritual topics. Let's spend a little time on the spiritual side of this. Um, Spiritual traumas often are relationship related, but they're the deep part. They're not the superficial thing of what happened, the actual event, um, but they're what does it mean to me as a person? How am I interpreting that in my personhood, and in my sense of identification with as who I am, my values? And so those traumas are often related to values, to the things that happen when we're put in a value conflict. Um, some very evil people are really good at doing that to people, putting them in a situation where their values are conflicted. I myself was dealing with something um, from my professional career where, and I didn't understand what was going on. It took quite a number of sessions with myself before I realized that I was conflicted no matter what I chose. That is, the options that I saw produced it wasn't just about which was the best choice. Each of them carried a conflict of values. If I did A, then there was a conflict with a certain value. If I did B, there'd be a different conflict. And if I did C, there was another conflict. And I realized I was trapped, so that no matter what I chose, I was going to feel guilty and feel that I had not been true to myself. And this was a remarkably deep seated conflict within me, the energy tangle within me. And once I realized that there was no right choice, that all choices had positive and negative consequences. And once I realized that, then I was able to, you might say, forgive myself for what I had, for the choice I had made, because I could have made the other choices, and it would have had the same effect on me. So that was a very, very interesting situation. It taught me quite a lesson. And there was a lot of relief once I had finally realized that, I was caught in a moral dilemma. And so in life, we often, or not often, but we do occasionally, find ourselves in that kind of moral dilemma where we feel there is no right choice. We may not understand that. And we may go like, well, that's a better choice than that. A is better than B. But what we may not realize is that neither A nor B is free of guilt, free of shame, free of the sense of I've not been true to myself. And that produces a spiritual crisis within us. Um, there are other spiritual crises related to the tests of faith. And those are extremely profound ones. I've talked about this before. I'll spend just a minute on it. But in life, sometimes we find a test of our faith. Can we believe that we are following nature's intelligence and following our true path? Or are we basically just being beat up by our karma? And I remember at one point in my life saying to myself repeatedly, God doesn't love me. It was kind of a joke, actually. I didn't actually believe that, but it was a way of saying, gee, why am I going through all of this? And then I reflected on the story of Job from the Bible. It's a very long story. It's a very unusual story for the Bible. It's quite lengthy. It's a long discourse on karma, but it's all about faith. And Job is a truly faithful person. He completely believes in God and is willing to accept whatever God throws at him. And basically, in the course of the thing, in the story, he loses everything, his family and his fortune, his farm, all his cattle, sheep, pigs. No, he wouldn't have pigs. All, he loses everything. And in the end, there's a second ending. The first ending is that he gets to basically confront God. Why you've thrown all of this at me, and all I want to know is all I want is that I meet you. I get to know you. And so God teaches him a lesson that basically he doesn't get to tell God how it goes. But I won't go through the details, but it's fun to read it, and but it's not a quick read. And so he is rewarded by getting to experience the omnipresence and omnipotence of God, and in that way, seeing God. That's how he gets to see God is to experience that uh, omnipotence. And then in the end, the fifth book talks, which is a chapter, the fifth book talks about the restoration of his family and wealth. He ends his life well rewarded. And there are some scholars who think that ending, that last ending, might have been added on later because people couldn't understand how just meeting God would be sufficient. That they needed a physical restoration. I kind of, when you hear this story like that, told like that, it makes me think that, yeah, that just doesn't work. The real story is that he gets to see the omnipotence of God. He understands God's power. And God never tells him that he did it because he had this wager with the devil, that there was at least one true believer on earth. Um, so anyway, tests of faith are very difficult to live with because they often go over quite a period of time and involve a great deal of suffering. And the real question in a test of faith is, can you maintain your faith? Can you maintain that you are doing the best you can and therefore not directly responsible for what's going on? And it's just what nature, God, has thrown at you to see if you can maintain your faith in what your understanding of how the universe operates. And if you can maintain your faith in that, then you, so to speak, pass the test, and you get to, enjoy the reward of seeing the ultimate goodness, the ultimate rightness. Goodness isn't the right word. It's the ultimate rightness of what transpires. And even though you may have suffered and there may have been losses and so on and so forth, you still are okay. And that sense of okayness is very much a part of who you are. It is, that very subtle level of your existence. And so the resolution of spiritual challenges like that, it's a very interesting thing for me to work with. And it can present as a very, as an acute problem. It's like all of a sudden your life falls apart. And it's like, why is this happening? It might be a disease, it might be a loss, which could be financial or family relationships, and so on and so forth. And then, to work that out can be very, it's actually very exciting. I find it exciting, and I think the people that I've worked with on those kinds of situations, have found that also to be very true. It's like a revelation. That's a good word for that. It's a revelation to be there and see the continuity of your life, see the wholeness of your life, and not just the suffering part of it, which you see as more superficial. It's like underneath, I am me, I am okay, I am here, and I am with that intelligence of nature, that with my God, and everything's okay. So I'm going to end the presentation here. And if there are any questions, I'll invite you to put those in the chat, um, which is at the bottom, in the menu down there at the bottom of your screen. You should have a chat button, which you can click on. And I'll give people just a moment or two here to do that. While I'm waiting for somebody to say something, I'm taking attendance, checking everybody off. Okay. All right. We'll end this recording here then. I didn't get any questions, so it's been wonderful sharing this information with you, and I hope it inspires you to not suffer, to recognize when some help would speed things along for you and reduce the suffering and make life good again. So we'll leave you with that. And, you can always contact me through the website. I do encourage people to actually phone me, though, when something happens, so that we can get right to work on it, because that's a great way to get started.